Good evening. I'm Shelley Spector, founder and director of the Museum of Public Relations. On behalf of all of us at the museum, I'd like to welcome you to our 8th annual event, honoring the PR women who changed history. I'd like to extend my sincerest thanks to tonight's sponsors who helped make this show possible: Amazon, Google, the Grady School at the University of Georgia, Hunter PR, and Compro. Many of the women you'll meet here tonight have themselves directly shaped the course of history. Many other women you'll meet tonight will be through the stories told by our panel of PR leaders. On this, the start of Women's History Month, we want to take a moment to honor all women in our profession who, through their work, have managed to make the world a better place. One such woman is Joanne Taballija Murphy, our moderator for this evening. Joanne is the National Director of Public Affairs and Corporate Affairs for Walmart. Her charge is to support diverse communities throughout the nation and strengthen the company's bonds with the 4,700 plus neighborhoods that Walmart serves. Now it's my distinct honor to introduce you to Joanne.
Thanks so much, Shelley, for the great introduction. I really appreciate, and I'm honored to be able to host tonight's show. So who am I? Shelley described it very, very well. I am so fortunate to be able to, work for a company that brings my personal purpose and my job and role together. So matching company with personal purposes, a sweet spot for me. Advocating and lifting others, especially women, is what it's all about. My company and I provide a platform for women's voices, and I think that that's really important, that we lift each other and that we have allies who lift us as well. And I think that's why this event is so important to me. I know that the women that you're going to hear from tonight will inspire you to push, lean in, and advocate for each other. So without further ado, let me get on and introduce tonight's guests. These are women who have changed history, women who help others, from cancer to campaigns against domestic violence. They are legendary PR women who have lived through change. And for the first time ever, we will hear about the first woman in PR history. Yes, that's right, in PR history. So our first guest is the founder of Hunter PR. And in the industry, she's been in the industry for over 50 years. She will be interviewed by the current CEO and partner at the firm that she founded. Welcome, Barbara Hunter and Grace Leong. Barbara, Grace?
Here I am.
Great, Barbara, thank you. And Grace?
I am here, but I seem to can't start my video. But you guys don't need to see me. Can you hear me though?
We can hear you. Go ahead.
Okay. Oh, there I am. Hello, everybody.
Oh, there you
Joanne,
are.
thank you very much for the introduction. This is probably my favorite month of the year because it celebrates women. And, I've been fortunate enough to be inspired. My entire career professionally has been inspired primarily by this one woman I'm going to get to interview tonight. I've known her my entire career. She was my first boss, my only boss, and the best boss. And, I'm just going to, you probably know her, Barbara Hunter. If you're a student of public relations, you've read about her in textbooks. If you are an agency practitioner, like many of you on the phone, you know her as woman. She and her sister, Jean Schoonover, to be the first to own a major public relations, own and operate a public relations agency. And if you know anything about the industry and have followed it, she's won every single award and done everything you could possibly do in the public relations industry. And at age 95, this woman is still kicking it. and still sharper than anybody. She was with us yesterday. Hunter, the agency that she founded on March 1st, 1989, no coincidence that she founded it during Women's Month, celebrated our 34th anniversary yesterday. And Barbara beamed into our staff, our office here in New York, and she wowed the crowd with her smarts and her stories about what it was like to be a pioneering woman enacting social change in this business. We had women in the audience. We're primarily a women run and owned and operated company, bowing down to the Queen. Literally, the Queen spoke yesterday, and the reactions were incredible. So we're going to chat. I have a few questions for Mrs. Hunter. I know we have so many other wonderful women to hear from, but I think we're going to start with Barbara. And Barbara, if you're ready to go, I have a few questions for you, right? Barbara's beaming in from her home in Walpole, New Hampshire. You see the beautiful home behind her. And I'm here in New York. So Barbara, we keep saying you're the headliner tonight because, you're a role model to so many women in the public relations industry for so long, including myself. And your story and that of your sister, Jean Schoonover, has been told many, many times in textbooks and, of course, by the PR Museum and in the halls of the two agencies that you founded and created. That said, who were your role models, Barbara, during your time as a pioneering woman in the 50s and the 60s and breaking into kind of a male-dominated field? Who were your role models at the time when there were very few women in your position?
Well, actually, I think my sister was my mentor and role model, and she was very, very helpful to me when I was starting out in public relations. And Grace, I just want to say something about you. You have done an absolutely phenomenal job with Hunter. I couldn't be prouder. I mean, I started with 3 people, and now it's like 255 people, as I understand it. And I think it's most of the credit goes to you, and I really applaud you.
Well, Barbara, you gave me your shoulders, and I stand on those shoulders. You gave me your values, and you gave me your work ethic. So how could I not succeed? And I think that's what we're all hearing today. I think, Joanne, you said it best. When there are women that when we support each other as a community and we lend each other shoulders and values and work ethics, there's nothing we can't do, right? So thank you for saying that. But I'm following what you established for all of us. So please continue. Jean Schoonover, your sister was your inspiration. So you guys were partners, right, in the business?
Yes.
Can you talk a little bit about that? How did that happen?
Well, I think that my sister was 7 years older than I, and I really didn't have a whole lot of interaction with her when we were at home. And it wasn't until I graduated from college and she managed to get me internships at a company called Topics Publishing Company, and it published a paper called Food Field Reporter. It was a trade paper for the food industry. And when I was graduating from Cornell, they called me because my sister was leaving and they wanted somebody to fill in for 3 weeks. And I was there for 2 years. And it was after that that I got into the public relations business because my sister heard of an opening at National Dairy Products Corporation. And so I applied and I got the job of promoting Seal Test ice cream and other products, and also the Seal Test Circus that was televised from Philadelphia like once a month. And so that was my beginning. And I was there for 2 years, and in that time I had married, and I was going to have a baby, and I told them that I would like to take a leave for a few weeks, and they said, fine, we'll hold your job for you. Well, when I came back after 3 weeks, they had put somebody else in my job, and I didn't have one. And here I had a small baby and a husband that didn't have a job at that time. So it was a little difficult, but I started interviewing, and I got a position right away with a small PR agency. And then after 2 years there, so I went to Dudley Anderson Utsey, and again, my sister was there. And even though the company had a policy against nepotism, she convinced one of the partners to hire me in what was sort of the food division of the firm. And so I started my wonderful career there that I so enjoyed.
Yeah. Hey, Barbara, so here you are, you start as a young entry-level person, your sister's already there. And then soon after, you decide that you and your sister are going to take over this firm. And, you did so. You two teamed up, the Sister Act, they used to call you. I love reading those old clips when the press refers to you guys as the Sister Act. When you guys decided to take over DAY and, own it and operate it, can you talk about some of the actions that you took to immediately enact the equality that you wanted in the firm? Up until that point, I remember you telling me there was a lot of inequality. So when you guys decided to take over this firm, what happened? Talk about, some of your first actions and what you saw needed to be done immediately.
Well, first of all, we took over the firm when 2 of the partners died and the other partner wanted to retire. And they made an offer to all of the vice presidents, and there were about 10 of them. And I would say 6 were men and maybe 4 were women. And but there was no plan for management or anything like that. So my sister and I decided that we would make an offer for the firm, and we cobbled the money, getting loans and so on, and made an offer to the living partner, the third one, and he accepted. And most of the men, many of them left and took their clients with them, their corporate clients and so on, because they didn't want to work for women. And so we started out, and the first thing that we did, we found that there was a great salary discrepancy between the men and the women, and women were earning much less for doing the same job that the men were. So the first thing, we did have a few men in the agency even after we took it over. And so the first thing we did was to bring the salaries up so that they were equal. And that was very important to us.
Yeah, I love that story. Your first act was to go down with a red pen and, put some more zeros for the women. We talk about equality and what can we do first. That seems like the easiest step, right? To equalize the pay for the same job. So thank you for showing us the way on that. The pay gap obviously still exists, but I think we're making great strides. Barbara, you have a million stories, and I've heard many of them, and they make me laugh. And I always wonder, how could that be? But the stories you used to tell us about how you were treated when you showed up in a conference room or on a pitch or in front of a client as a female leader and CEO blow my mind. Really? So can you tell some of the stories, or 1 or 2 of the stories, that when you or Jean showed up as the female leader of the account or even the agency, how were you treated when you walked into the room by men, and how did you respond? Because I think it's your responses that we can all learn from today about, when you're faced with an inequality or you're treated like a different class of a citizen, how should we react? So I'll turn it back to you.
Well, most of our experiences were very good. And I think part of the reason was that we were representing an expertise. We knew how to reach the media, and also we were working with consumer products, and our first sort of theme was, we know about women because we are women. But sometimes we ran into some difficult situations. Like one, we were invited to make a presentation to this one corporation, and I don't remember what it was, and we worked really hard on it because it was a stretch for us because it wasn't a food client. And so we made our pitch and so on. And afterward, we were told by the director of PR of that corporation that they only brought us in because they wanted to say they had included an agency headed by women, but they had no thought that they were going to hire us.
Yeah. So you were kind of tokenized at that point, but did you end up winning that account, Barbara?
No, we did not.
No. But
No,
I
they
think
weren't going to hire us under any circumstances.
remember the story, you said something and the punchline ended with, yeah, we hired women and I'm glad we did.
Oh, that was when we made a pitch for the city of Little Rock. And we sent people out to Little Rock to interview people and photograph places and so on. And so when the committee came to interview agencies, we brought them into our conference room, and it was surrounded by pictures of Little Rock and so on. And we won the business. And I was heading up the team that went to Little Rock for our first go around. And I had to speak at all kinds of places, the Chamber of Commerce and so on. And I remember after one time when I made the presentation, a man came up to me and said, I never thought we would hire a firm headed by women, but I'm glad we did.
There you go.
Yeah.
Yes, performance, right? The performance, you know, every gender melts away. It doesn't matter. It's what performance you put out there, right?
That's right. Yeah.
One final question for Barbara for you, because I know we have to move on to hear from so many wonderful women. I know that's hard to, you've done everything right. You have an illustrious, storied career. You've opened up so many doors for so many women. But if you could give your younger self some advice as a young leader, what would have you told yourself back then in 1960, 1970 that you didn't know then, but you know now?
Well, all I can say is if I were advising young women, I would say to retain your integrity, be true to yourself and to whoever you're working with. Also, be kind. I think it's important that people treat other people with respect and kindness. And the other thing I would say is to continue to learn all your career long. And one of the things I like particularly about being in the agency business was with a new client, you have a whole new universe to learn about. And that was fascinating to me. But I think that, you know, being trustworthy and honest and so on is very important. Yeah.
Barbara, you're incredible. Again, you inspire us, me, every single day, and legions of women. So I want to thank you for being with us here tonight. Thank you for the time. Thanks everyone for listening. Joanne, we'll send it back to you.
Well, I want to thank you for having me on.
Barbara, Grace, you both are incredible. I love the fact that Barbara gave us some tips to go on, like retaining integrity, being kind, and don't forget to be respectful, continuing to learn. Such great advice. Thank you both. And Grace, thank you for bringing out the best in Barbara. Okay. So we're going to move on to our next guest, who made it all the way to the C-suite of the journalism industry. Today, we have the CEO of Mansueto Ventures, the publisher of both Inc. and Fast Company. She's dedicated to serving business leaders her companies are dedicated to serving business leaders who are shaping the future of today's economy. So I am going to welcome Stephanie Mehta. Take a listen.
I mean, I feel like it is such an honor and a privilege to get to do what I do every day. And, that was a phrase I heard probably 15 years ago from a woman named Carol Loomis, who was sort of the dean of Fortune magazine when I was there. She was somebody that, was an unimpeachable financial journalist, had been doing it since the early days when there weren't a lot of women in financial journalism. And, she just excelled at her work. But as good as she was very humble about the fact that, what we got to do for a living was an incredible privilege. And I sort of feel the same way about, what I get to do every day in my role as chief content officer, which means I still sort of have an editorial hat that I wear at Mansueto Ventures, but also as a CEO, where I get to help shape the direction of the company, drive the company culture, and hopefully, really try to set us up for a future of success in an industry that has quite honestly seen its shares of ups and downs. So, but I guess I do consider myself really lucky to get to do what I do every day.
You've done so many great things along your path, along your journey of career. I think I'd like to see if our audience can kind of get to know you and who you are, that you're, women, we carry multiple identities, right? We self-identify with many different things, but that's important for our audience to know about who you are. You're not just a working machine, right?
No. If I were just a machine, the robots would come for my job. It's already happening. Well, thank you for asking that question. And I think it's really interesting because like you, I wear multiple hats. I'm a mother, I'm a spouse, I'm a daughter, I'm a working parent. I wear two hats at work. I'm a chief content officer for our parent company. We publish Fast Company and Inc. magazines, but I'm also the chief executive officer. So part of my day is always spent thinking about the content we produce and the quality of our journalism. And then part of my day is thinking about ensuring the future of our business. So, I think the multiple hats I've worn in my personal life have set me up nicely to have this dual role in my professional life.
What is it about media and journalism and communications and PR that, that keeps you interested in continuing down this path that you started a while ago, but what keeps you going?
Well, I think it's an insatiable curiosity. That was what drove me into journalism. And I think that that's something that journalists and media communications professionals have in common. It's our job to ask questions. It's our jobs to get to the sort of essential truth of, in the case of the journalist, it's a story. In the case of a media relations professional, it's trying to understand how to communicate something beyond the executive ranks to the broader company or to the public. And you can't do that well unless you're really curious and you are willing to ask hard questions and maybe even be a little impertinent from time to time. So I think it is a curiosity about the world that has kept my job interesting, first as a journalist and now as an executive. I find that, part of my role as a business person now is, asking questions and, really just trying to get to the essential truths.
Yeah, they say that curiosity really helps inform and helps you grow personally. Is that how you feel?
Absolutely. And, again, as we said, there's the sort of blurring of the personal and the professional. And I do find that, I like to bring my professional curiosity into my personal life. And I like to bring the things that I'm curious about in the world as the parent of 2 teenagers, it is really interesting to think about the kinds of perspectives that young people are bringing to society and culture. And, now those youngest Gen Zers are now in the workplace, and they're going to have a profound impact on the world of business. So the curiosity that I have about the ways that they communicate and live their lives, I'm trying to bring that into the workplace as well, because as a leader of 2 publications that, we try to attract that younger reader, it's really important to understand how they communicate and how they like to receive information. And so again, bringing that curiosity from home into the office, virtual or otherwise, has held me in good stead.
Were there any learnings that you'd like to share with the audience? Any opportunities that you had to think twice about? Any challenges?
So in my late 20s, I had become an assistant editor at the Wall Street Journal. Back then, they had a structure of bureau chiefs, and I was a deputy bureau chief and was probably well on my way to becoming a bureau chief at the Journal had I stayed. But I was in this sort of interesting role where I was spending half my time writing and half my time editing. And I was finding I was stalling as a writer, that I had learned a ton in my time at the Journal as a writer and editor, but I wasn't growing. And Fortune magazine approached me about coming over to be a writer full time there. And I had hoped that they would offer me a senior writer role. I thought, given what I've accomplished as a journalist, I should be coming in as senior level. And the hiring editor said to me, I really think you should come in as a writer. And if you prove yourself, the titles will come. But what I'm offering you is a chance to really grow, to do long form magazine style journalism, and to do it with a bunch of editors that I think you're really going to learn from. And so I thought long and hard about it. And I ultimately didn't let that title get in the way of me taking advantage of what I saw as a really good opportunity. And so, in spite of the fact that probably if people looked at that on LinkedIn, they would say, boy, that looks kind of like a step back. In the end, it proved to be an incredible leap forward, because I did learn a lot. I did grow as a writer. And as that editor had promised, within a year, I had gotten the promotion I was looking for. So, my lessons learned have all been about sort of, taking the long view on a career and not letting, what you think of now as so important, but at the time was not that big of a difference between being a writer and a senior writer. If I had let that get in the way, who knows where I'd be today.
Speaking of media, what role do you think that media can play in helping achieve, greater equality, like in the workplace?
I've been lucky to work at a number of publications in the world of sort of covering business that have done a really good job of shining a light on inequities in the workplace. And I give a lot of companies credit too for stepping forward on this. So, when the executives at Salesforce realized that there was a pay equity issue at that company, they went to Mark Benioff and they asked him to do a pay equity audit. And, as a tech company, they always thought, hey, we're a meritocracy. If you're performing here, the pay will come. And, sure enough, they did the audit and women were underpaid. And not only did they fix the issue, but then they went public with their story. And the journalists who helped tell that story and who helped shine a light on that pay inequity, I think did a real service. I mean, again, credit to the company for being willing to go public with the equity audit and the reparations made. But, it was really important that news organizations realize this is a story, and this is a story not only because it's a story about a company that, wasn't living up to its values, but more importantly, also decided to talk about the fixes, because I think that's where the lessons learned come for organizations. When they read about other companies that are bigger, more powerful, but ultimately are fallible and have gone about going to fix it, I think it gives other C-suites the air cover they need to go to their CEOs and CFOs and say, hey, we should do the same thing, because if it's happening at Salesforce, it's very likely happening at our organization. So I think from an editorial standpoint, news organizations can play a really big role in shining a spotlight and, where possible, or giving the positive outcomes, or helping companies understand that here are the tools that you can use to fix your problems. I think when I think about media more broadly, whether it's newsrooms or organizations in radio, television, film, movies, our work product is so visible to the world. And when we don't reflect society more broadly, readers, viewers, listeners, audiences recognize that. They see it, and they see the hypocrisy of our organization saying, our values are around equity, and then, you put out a television show or a news broadcast or a podcast, and there are no diverse voices. So I think that justifiably, media should be held to a high standard, and that our voices should reflect the population more broadly.
This all ends up with building trust, right? The company's building trust with whoever their customers are, whether it be B2B or B2C, and the authenticity of how a company comes across. I understand that it's hard for companies to rise to that occasion, right? Do you see particular challenges with that?
I do think that it is a new muscle that organizations are just starting to flex. And so, like any new skill set, it is going to be challenging for an organization. I think our organization, the one I work at, is still working on it. And I think, any executive who cares about this topic, will know that the work is never done. This is an ongoing initiative. This is something that we have to think about and work on every day. And so, when an executive says to you that, they've got it figured out, I'd be really suspicious about it, because it is hard work. And, as I said, if you're doing it right, you're always pushing yourself, and the work is always ongoing. But I would say that, I think for many organizations, the effort to become more inclusive in hiring practices is something that they're, really starting to build. And so, many diversity, equity, and inclusion experts will tell you that this is a journey. And so I want to be mindful and give credit to companies who are in the very early stages of the journey. I don't want for them to feel discouraged because, the first year didn't yield huge results right out the bat. It is a journey, but I do think that I'm heartened by the number of companies that have committed to taking the journey.
Thank you so much for sharing who you are, as well as, your nuggets of wisdom too. So thank you so much for being.
Oh, thank you, Joanne. This was such a pleasure.
You're welcome. Boy, I have to tell you, she's special to me. Our next guest will share her story and her stories about supporting women. She founded the Working Mothers magazine in the 1970s. And a decade later, she created the Working Mother 100 Best Companies, one of the most important benchmarks of corporate support of women. Not only that, but she is also currently serving as the CEO of Share. That Share supports women with cancer. She is a dedicated person, and she is a friend of mine. Welcome, Carol Evans.
Thank you so much, Joanne. I'm so excited to be here tonight.
Oh gosh, we're excited to have you too. It's like homecoming for the two of us. It's been a few years, y'all.
We spent a lot of years together.
We have. Carol, you have done an incredible number of things in your lifetime, and you have pushed the bar. You've joined other pioneer women to push the borders that have been there, and ceilings that have been set. I know you've seen lots of changes. Were there societal changes that made, the publishers in the mid 1970s determine that there was a whole brand new niche of readers to be served, mainly working mothers?
Yes, there is a great story behind that. Our wonderful first editor, Vivian Cadden, who was a unionizer and a real rabble rouser, wonderful, wonderful woman. She was thinking about her child and her grandchild who was coming on the scene soon. And she did a survey of all the magazines. She worked for McCall's, which launched Working Mother. She went through all the magazines, the Seven Sisters and everybody. She looked for any article about working mothers and found not a one. And this is 1977. And so she went to the CEO of McCall's at that time, and she pitched the fact that there were 32 million working mothers in the country, and there was not one article about them. And so he greenlighted the launch of Working Mother magazine, which I was associated with for many, many years. And I loved the magazine so much I went out and bought it, in 2001. I was the first mom, and I was the first woman to own Working Mother magazine, and that was in 2001, and it was launched in 1978. So that's a long time with 3 different male owners.
Oh my goodness. Well, then it certainly makes sense that you came on board because you have the heart and the passion, and you have a personal connection to it all. But that is a long time. Did it take a while in the time that you were watching and working, Working Mother, did it take a while for the publication to catch on? It seemed like the advertisers really loved it.
Yeah,
but,
it caught on right away. I mean, I sold the test issue I was in advertising sales at the time. I sold the test issue and brought in 8 pages of advertising, which was unheard of. And from there, it just blossomed. The readers loved it. The advertisers loved it. There was nothing like it on earth. And it was it was not easy to launch a publication, and I was very young in my role, but it just really caught on. And I had a special affinity for it because my mother was a working mother. When I was 12, she went back to work, and I saw how she struggled to do everything, including the laundry at 3 a.m. And so I had a huge empathy for working mothers. And it wasn't until I'd been working at and leading Working Mother for 9 years that I had my own baby.
Oh.
And then I knew everything. I knew that everything that I was saying about working mothers wasn't quite right. It was a lot harder.
The whole balancing thing, right? And trying to figure it all out. And, it's really interesting because back then, what I remember is, and this is because when I think about my mom as well, that the woman's place was in the kitchen at the time. Mm-hmm. And it just seems far away, but then not maybe so far away anyway, but surely not in the boardroom, right? It just seemed like in the 70s, with the passage of the ERA, women could finally compete against men for those top jobs. So, and here you go and eventually, own the magazine, run the magazine. But back then, what was it like for women? You kind of mentioned it a little bit, women in the workplace, women being pregnant, men who are supervising them and not being familiar with.
Yeah, it was super hard because the men, all the executive men had stay-at-home lives for the most part. So they were not sympathetic to what we were attempting to do. And we were, very much interested. Some of us were just really had to work for the money. And some of us just really wanted to push the envelope on how far women could go. I don't even know how many women CEOs there were, but you could count it on one hand back then. And, it's still a paltry number of of women who are CEOs versus the enormous number of men, if you think about the Fortune 500. And so, it's been a real struggle and an effort. I think that, you have to be bold. You have to be bold to go into a position that no one's been in before. You have to be bold to be the only woman in the room, which happens over and over. You have to be bold to be able to, take a lot of no's because nobody wanted to invest in a woman. Nobody wanted to, be the backer when I bought Working Mother, until the 37th person that I presented to said yes.
Well, so what gave you that courage? What gave you that boldness? Why are you so fierce?
Well, I really am passionate about women's success. And I feel that if we aren't bold, nothing's going to happen, because there's not a lot of, back then, there weren't a lot of people saying, oh, let's help the women. That just wasn't happening. So we had to represent ourselves, and we had to push. And there were so many of us. I mean, it was a cadre of women who really pushed and wanted to get ahead and wanted to make a difference for other women. So, it's just, I think you see something that you want and you go for it. It's a very female thing.
It's also female. I don't want to generalize, but to be very collaborative, right? And when I first met you, boy, it was 10 years ago, when I first started working at Walmart, I remember that there was a cadre, you're right. There was a group of CEOs and women who really banded together and support. I felt this support that you all had of each other, and that it wasn't that you were competitors trying to climb to the top on top of each other, right? Tell us about that.
Well, early on, there was the idea of a queen bee who didn't want anyone else to succeed. And then the idea was that the pie was very small. And if I didn't get my piece, if someone else got it, I wouldn't get it. And then I think women collectively kind of realized that we weren't the enemy, that there was plenty of pie out there. It was just that the men were taking all the pie. And so we needed to take the pie together. And, we formed a lot of organizations, a lot of nonprofits, a lot of associations where women could band together and work together to further the women in their industry. Every industry had a really wonderful women's group. And then, the women's organizations at corporations, the women's ERGs, were the first ones that were founded in almost every company, because the women wanted to help each other to get ahead.
It happens nowadays as well. I want you to know that work continues. And I'll just say this real quick. My daughter, who works in the construction and electrical construction industry, for a global company, had to start 2 years ago a women's ERG, because there wasn't one in that industry. So the work that you and Working Mother started, as well as the other CEOs that you were collaborating with, still continues today. But you mentioned something, Carol, about women in the workplace and how things have changed. But also that means that companies, not only did managers have to adapt to a different way of thinking about their coworkers and their staff and their teams, but also being around new employees this new employee base who were pregnant. And in some companies, being pregnant meant you could get fired. Do you have anything that you can share about, how perhaps stories that you'd heard, how you helped companies get through that part of, we're talking about kind of company policy, right?
Yeah, we're very much talking about HR policy. Well, the Working Mother 100 Best Companies, which I launched in 1986 and is still ongoing. What we did was we compared companies to each other using data to see who was doing the most for working mothers. And at first it was, like a daycare center here, maybe some concierge services. But then it just deepened and deepened. And honestly, the male CEOs were competing for the title of the best companies for working mothers because working mothers were great employees. And, so they really looked at each other, just like when we launched the best companies for multicultural women. We used actual data of representation of women of color in the companies to see, who might have more dedication to their advancement. I think that the public information, the representation to the general public about who's really caring about their employees made a huge difference and gave the CEOs the courage or the impetus to make real change with maternity leave policy, paid policy, then paternity policies, and all of the things that happened, lactation rooms. I mean, we got to a whole different level of benefits. And, there's still so much work to do, but boy, it's a huge change from what it was when we published that very first issue of Working Mother.
So now that you're working in a different capacity for a different organization, do you miss Working Mother?
Sometimes I do, but Share Cancer Support, it continues my own love of supporting working mothers. It's a support organization for patients who have women's cancers. And so we're right there one-on-one with the patient, helping them to understand their diagnosis, their possible treatments, to encourage people to get screenings. So it's just part of a continuum of women helping women. And, so in a way, it's just a new adventure.
I love that. You have been an amazing inspiration to all of us, and what the courage that it takes to continue. You and Barbara, my goodness, the courage that it takes the both of you to keep pushing that envelope. I'm sure there have to been ups and downs. Any lessons that you want to share?
Sure. I mean, the ups and downs are enormous. When I bought Working Mother magazine, it was literally 3 weeks to the day before 9/11. So, you can't get knocked down any more than that. And the tragedy that the whole country experienced was, at the same time as the birth of my brand new company. So I think you have to be looking for the best, but prepared for the worst. And you have to have that inner strength, that core strength that says, no matter what happens, I believe that I can make this work, and I have a team that's going to make it work with me. So, don't let the getting knocked down keep you from jumping back up and going for it some more.
Wow, that's great, Carol. Thank you so much for joining us today and sharing, your experience and your encouragement. We really, really appreciate you, Carol. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Joanne. It's so wonderful to be here.
It's great to see you too. Okay, we'll move on to our next guest. And I'd like to share that she made it all the way to the White House in the 1990s. Pretty amazing. She's now the CEO and president of the renowned Walker Marchant Group. And, they focus on global issues management, strategic communications, stakeholder mobilization, just a lot, very strong. Let's welcome Anne Marchant. Anne?
Thank you. Thank you so much. It's wonderful to be here. It's wonderful to be here at the beginning of Women's History Month to celebrate with so many amazing women. So thank you.
We're so glad that you could join us, take time to join us. When you went to work for PR agencies, mainly Burson Marsteller and Hill and Knowlton, you worked for some, pretty high profile international campaigns, right? Can you talk about those campaigns?
Absolutely. I was very fortunate. I had worked on a political campaign early on coming out of college. And unfortunately, my party had a very dramatic loss where we lost the House, the Senate, and the White House. And I realized that I needed a skill I loved politics, but I had also worked very closely with the media team on a campaign, and decided that maybe public relations was the place for me to develop a skill that was going to be marketable. And I was fortunate enough to be hired by Burson Marsteller, and I started way back when the assistant to the assistant account executive was the entry level place to start, but had an opportunity to work closely with people like Harold Burson, who was still going to work every single day and who took a real interest in everybody in the company, and had a wonderful opportunity to work with a man by the name of Jim Lindheim, who was really one of the founders of crisis communication. And I'm telling my age because I don't admit to being old enough to have worked on these campaigns, but some of the campaigns that we worked on were the Johnson & Johnson, both 1 and 2. And he was able to counsel the CEO of Johnson & Johnson that in order to maintain the trust of the consumer, that he had to do something really radical, which was take all of the Tylenol off the shelves, which was a radical move. We had no idea what was causing people to be ill, what was causing people to die. But he knew that the only way that they were going to be able to survive this is to put the consumer first. And that was really a learning experience in how leadership has to take.
Whoops, I think our connection is, I think we've kind of lost the connection here. We'll wait a second and see if maybe she can come back. What an amazing story, though. And we're going to have to make sure that we finish up on that story. But let's move on to our next guest, and when Anne is ready to join us, we'll come back to her. Our next guest has had just another remarkable PR career. She focuses on joy in life at the workplace. She's also a dear friend of mine. I've known her for at least 15 years, maybe. But I'd love her to tell us more about an incredibly important campaign against domestic violence. And please join me in welcoming my friend, Patrice Tanaka. Patrice, how are you?
Aloha. Thank you, Joanne. Yes, and I think it's longer than 15 years that we've known each other. And you've always been involved in programs supporting other women. And so you've been consistent for, I think it's like 20 something years, but we won't be getting into the specifics.
Now we'll show my age.
Yeah. I just know that whenever there's a space of women helping women, you're usually there. So that's a good thing. So anyway, I want to start by first saying happy birthday to Faye Shapiro, who is behind the scenes making this happen, spending her birthday with us. And Faye is someone who is probably one of the biggest supporters of women that I know. In fact, her life purpose is to be a fearless hunter of opportunities for herself and others. And that's what she's always doing, trying to help others. So happy birthday, Faye, and thank you for doing 2 webinars today on your birthday. So let me get back to the theme of tonight's Women's History Month celebration, which is activating social change. Now, I left the PR world 6 years ago, and one of the things that I loved most about my 35 plus year PR career was the work that my agencies did in creating campaigns addressing important social and health issues like domestic violence, illiteracy, financial illiteracy, breast cancer, drug abuse, and others. And working on these campaigns, I know firsthand that PR and comms professionals can activate social change within and beyond our workplaces. When I started my first PR agency, PT&Co, in 1990, after leading a group of colleagues in a management buyback from Chiat Day Advertising, I knew that we needed to distinguish our startup from every other PR agency in New York and in the US. And because we had no money for marketing, I felt that the most cost-efficient way to do this was to succinctly and actively communicate who we were as an agency, what we were committed to doing, and how we served the community at large. Now, today, this would be called a business purpose. And a business purpose, as you know, communicates how an organization creates value for all stakeholders, not just shareholders, and how it serves the greater good. In 1990, our business purpose for PT&Co, and we didn't call it a business purpose back then, but that's what it was. Our business purpose was to create great work, a great workplace, and great communities that work. And by that, I meant healthy, sustainable communities within and beyond our workplace. And to operationalize this business purpose at PT&Co, we did everything possible to create a great workplace where employees could bring their whole selves to the task of creating great work. And our goal was to make the Sunday night to Monday morning transition as easy and effortless and as stress-free as possible, because everybody talked about that sinking feeling in the pit of their stomach on Sunday night, and we didn't want employees to have to experience that. So what we did was we invited people to bring we allowed casual dress every day. We allowed employees to choose their own work hours. And we told employees that they could take paid time off to tend to personal emergencies as long as they got their work done. We also designed our offices to honor the needs of employees, from having a living room in the middle of our office to small bubbles, we called them bubbles, small conference rooms, so people could have private conversations since we had an open office, to an eat-in kitchen, so people could feel like they could go to the kitchen and grab a snack whenever they wanted, to a meditation room. And again, we didn't require that employees meditate or even pray, but they could use that room to take a nap, to use it as a lactation room, whatever they wanted, you know, because sometimes they needed just a time out and privacy from, you know, working in an open office. We also tried to have fun too, and we celebrated by having margaritas on the fiesta deck every Wednesday at 5 p.m. and gave employees every other Friday off during the summer. And our generous benefits did include paid maternity leave, which is one of the reasons that I believe that Working Mother magazine recognized PT&Co with a Mothering That Works award in 1994. So thank you very much, Carol, for all that you did and for that lovely award. And it's one of the awards that I treasure most because it speaks to our commitment at PT&Co to create a great workplace. In 1991, when we began offering maternity benefits to employees, I think we were the first PR agency, or certainly one of the first PR agencies to do so. And I'm happy that we inspired and activated social change to create more employee-friendly workplaces, because I don't know how many of you can remember that working in PR in the 90s, it was kind of a sweatshop, and we wanted to be the anti-PR agency in that regard. So I think we kind of activated social change even within the workplace. But beyond our workplace, our agency was also committed to activating social change to create great communities that work. And as I said earlier, by that we meant healthy, sustainable communities through the work that we did for clients. And I remember many years before starting PT&Co, reading H. Scott Peck's best-selling book, The Road Less Traveled. And a line in the book leapt off the page at me. It said that business can be a catalyst for positive social change. And that really woke me up, because that statement rang so true for me. And I knew that I wanted to have a business that was a catalyst for positive social change. And our first opportunity to do this through a client campaign was for women's apparel designer, manufacturer, and retailer, Liz Claiborne. In November of 1990, just 4 months after starting PT & Company, we were invited to meet Wendy Banks, the late CMO of Liz Claiborne, about doing some PR work. And Wendy told us that she was looking for a way to reburnish Liz Claiborne's reputation as a pioneer and a map maker, which they were celebrated for 15 years earlier by being the first company to design clothes for the working woman. 15 years later, however, many other apparel manufacturers were designing for the working woman, and Liz Claiborne was no longer cutting edge or perceived as pioneering or map making. So our team, led by my colleagues Ellen Lenicka and Maria Caligaris, came back to the office to brainstorm how we could achieve this when nothing about Liz Claiborne's current collection screamed pioneer or map maker. And we strategized and landed on that the best way to accomplish this was for Liz Claiborne to embrace a social issue that would help restore the brand's reputation as a pioneer and map maker. So we conducted a massive audit of about 20 plus social, health, and environmental issues that we believed resonated with women across the wide age spectrum that Wendy Banks identified as the brand's core customers. She told us that the customers of Liz Claiborne spanned from 16 years of age to 60 years of age, 60. And we almost fell off our chairs when we heard that, because we'd never heard a brand marketer ever, describe their target customer in such an expansive way. So clearly we had to identify an issue that resonated with women 16 to 60. The issue we selected also had to meet other important criteria, like it couldn't be, we couldn't get involved in an issue that was already crowded with a lot of major other national companies involved in that issue, because our budget wouldn't, stretch to make a difference for Liz Claiborne. We also needed to select an issue that had a strong national nonprofit partner that we could work with, as well as local partners in all of Liz Claiborne's 100 and plus store markets. There are other criteria, and so we actually created this massive Excel spreadsheet to evaluate every issue against our key criteria. And the issue that leapt off the spreadsheet was domestic violence. And my heart sank, because that was the one issue I was terrified that might emerge as the issue that we should address. And what made it interesting for us was that it was an orphan issue. In 1991, there were no major national companies involved in the issue as compared to, for example, breast cancer, which already had 35 plus national companies actively involved in the issue. Domestic violence was an orphan issue for obvious reasons. It was not a pretty issue, and no marketer, wanted to touch such an ugly issue. We believed, however, that if Liz Claiborne had the courage to embrace the ugly issue of domestic violence, that this mainstream apparel brand could help to mainstream the issue of domestic violence and reposition it from a private hidden family matter to what it really was, which was a public health crisis, in order to activate a systemic response to addressing the problem of domestic violence. A systemic response was needed, and one that involved the public, private, and nonprofit sectors, including police, judiciary, government, business, academia, educators, news media, sports and entertainment celebrities, among others. In 1991, domestic violence was not being covered by the media because it was considered a private, hidden family matter. Women who reported abuse were not being helped by the police or the judicial or legal system because, again, it was considered a private, hidden family matter. And employers didn't see themselves as having any role in protecting and supporting their employees who were experiencing domestic abuse, again, because it was perceived as a private family matter. Our Love Is Not Abuse campaign for Liz Claiborne, which began in 1992 and ran for more than 20 years, was the longest running corporate campaign addressing the issue of domestic violence, awareness, and prevention. In 1994, the Violence Against Women Act, VAWA is what it's called, was co-authored by the Family Violence Prevention Fund, and the fund was our national nonprofit partner. The organization has rebranded, and today they're called Futures Without Violence, but back then it was the Family Violence Prevention Fund, or the fund. And the fund worked with then Senator Joe Biden to get VAWA passed by Congress. And the Violence Against Women Act was signed into law by President Clinton. And the act established the Office of Violence Against Women within the U.S. Department of Justice. Also in 1994, our Liz Claiborne client, Wendy Banks, who was on the board of the Ad Council, spearheaded an Ad Council produced campaign entitled "There's No Excuse for Domestic Violence." Finally, in 1995, the high-profile O.J. Simpson murder trial heightened awareness of domestic violence over a prolonged 8-month-long period because of the daily national media coverage that was generated by covering this campaign. And the cumulative effect of all of this, activated in 1992 by Liz Claiborne's Love Is Not Abuse campaign, in partnership with the Family Violence Prevention Fund, is the reason that founder Esta Solar reported that domestic violence incidents actually declined 65% during the 20 years between 1993 and 2013. And before 1980, there were only 100+ stories written about domestic violence in the New York Times. In the 2000s, more than 7,000 stories were written about domestic violence in the New York Times. You know, the media was, as I said, was not covering domestic violence. And that's a big problem. If the media is not covering domestic violence, then public doesn't understand that it is a public health crisis. So turning the tide on domestic violence in 1992 was activated by Liz Claiborne's Love Is Not Abuse campaign. And as we anticipated, Liz Claiborne's important role of mainstreaming the issue of domestic violence, making it safe for other companies to get involved with this ugly issue, did happen. And in fact, companies like the Body Shop and Avon and Verizon and the Wireless Foundation all got involved in supporting domestic violence awareness and prevention initiatives. So Love Is Not Abuse and other social issues campaigns that I've worked on is why I know that PR and communications can activate positive social change and at the same time accomplish clients' business objectives. In fact, Liz Claiborne's pioneering and map-making reputation was reburnished as a fearless supporter of women because of their leadership on domestic violence awareness and prevention. And the Love is Not Abuse campaign is the reason I know that business can be a catalyst for positive social change, as author H. Scott Peck said in his book, The Road Less Traveled, in 1979. So I say to all PR and comms professionals, please go forth and activate positive social change. Our people and planet will thank you. So mahalo and aloha, everyone. That's my presentation.
Oh, Patrice, just amazing stats, right? And
Yeah.
there's so much that can be done when it comes to positive social change through communications, through public relations, through the agency work, through corporations. And this example is a shining example of what still needs to be done. There's so much more work to do. And I just want to say, we've got Anne Marchant back again. And I think you agree as well on the domestic violence issue.
Absolutely. And thank you so much, Patrice, for all you've done. And what you said about what Liz Claiborne did in terms of highlighting the importance of domestic violence. You know, it wasn't, as you said, it wasn't until 1995 that it was illegal for a man to beat his wife. It wasn't until 1995 when the Violence Against Women Act was passed, introduced by Joe Biden and passed with a bipartisan group that said it is illegal for you to abuse your wife. And that's not that long ago. And I think one of the scourges that you helped alleviate was everybody thought it was something that happened in somebody else's backyard. It was, you know, a socioeconomic issue. It was a racial issue. It didn't happen to people like us. And we worked with, you know, with several organizations and companies like yours. And we often said at these charity dinners, look to your left and look to your right. At least one of those women has been affected or has been, you know, in a situation where they had a partner violence or family violence that has changed their life.
Yeah. No, absolutely. And you can imagine, you know, we just started our agency 4 months earlier and we have this huge opportunity and we decide that we should do a social issues marketing campaign. And the issue that we were going to recommend to the client was domestic violence. We had a lot of trepidation about it because, you know, we could see no evidence around us. The media wasn't covering it. So we actually decided, even though we couldn't afford it, to do a little research. And that research was 2 questions in an omnibus that was being conducted every week. And we just asked 2 questions because that's all we could afford. One question was, do you believe domestic violence is a problem in America today? And second question, if you believe it's a problem, would you think positively about a company that was going to do something to address this problem? We were shocked that the responses, and this is women 18 and older, projected to represent the population as a whole. The responses to both questions were in the high 80s and the low 90%. This is in 1991 when nobody was talking about it. And only after conducting with that research did we feel confident enough to present this idea to the chair, to the CEO and to the CMO of marketing. And thank God they got it. And, you know, green lighted this idea in the campaign. But
well, Patrice, I can't tell you how much we appreciate you reminding all of us of what everyone can do within their network, within the circles that they touch, and to create positive social change. Thank you so much, Patrice. We honor you. We appreciate the work that you've done and that you continue to do, because even the mentoring that you do is just amazing work. You continue to grow and advocate for others. So thank you for all that you do. Thank you, Patrice.
Like you, we all believe here on this call, I know, in women supporting other women. And that's how we're going to move forward. Thank
Absolutely.
you all. Thank you to the museum, and thank you to Faye for partnering with the museum for as long as you have on all of these events. All right, I will turn my camera off right now.
Okay. And we're so
Aloha.
glad you were able to come back to us. Thank you for doing that. This is actually a really great segue to the next question that I was going to ask you and will ask you is about, I mean, you're an entrepreneur. So, 15 years ago, you decided to open up your own firm. That had to be, I mean, I'm not brave and I've worked for corporate my entire life. And entrepreneurs are risk takers. They have courage. I so admire people like you. What would you encourage other young women to do? Would you encourage them to open up their own firms as well and take that risk?
I think that people who want to be entrepreneurs should. It should take chances if that's what they want. There are people like you who have made a very, very successful career and really made a lot of impact and change, and have really affected the industry from within corporate. And I've actually never worked inside corporate. I've worked with agencies, and I've worked in government, but I've never been on the corporate side. But having been in an agency, having been in the three largest agencies between Burson Marsteller, Hill and Knowlton, and Shandwick when we merged with Weber, I had a vision that was different than what I was seeing in the industry. And I thought that I could make a difference and provide a different offering than what was available at the time. I wanted to have an agency that was values-based. And there had been, particularly in the 90s, when there were a lot of the mergers of agencies going on, there were a lot of acquisitions that were going on by the holding companies. And there was a lot of focus on the bottom line. And there were clients that we were taking that didn't necessarily align with what my values were or what some of the other people's values were, but there was a thought process that everyone deserves representation, which is true. But does everyone deserve my representation? And am I really going to do a good job for that client if I don't believe in the issues and we don't share the same values? And am I really going to be able to lead a team if I'm not passionate about what we're doing and they aren't either? So I wanted a team and an agency that worked with clients where we could really develop a partnership and we could look at what is the bottom line, what's the business goal and objective, and how do we apply a communications strategy and plan to help meet the business goals, and develop a partnership so we really understood and could work with our clients, and that we weren't trying to take on so many clients and constantly chasing new business, but rather growing our business organically within corporations. Because if you do a really good job, then you're going to be recommended within your client's business. And what's the best recommendation, but recommendation from a client that you already have? So it also was our thought process that it would be a place that people would want to work at if they were working with clients that were values based and aligned with their thinking. And it didn't need to be huge. I didn't want a 1,000-person agency. I wanted a small boutique agency that really provided senior level strategic counsel to clients. And we were able to do that because we understood their business.
Wow, was that a hard sell? Well, I can't even, okay, so lots of questions are going through my head. So was that a hard sell to clients or potential clients? And what was interviewing like when you were trying to recruit, folks to work for your agency? Because that was a different approach, right?
it was a very different approach. It was a very different approach, and I was very fortunate. I come from a family of entrepreneurs. My father was an entrepreneur, so I had seen it. I think my father always said, "You've got a skill base, you have experience. If it doesn't work, you can always go back and get a job. But if you don't try it, and it's something that you feel like you want to try, you'll always regret it. So try." And I did. I had a client that I was working on developing for new business with the agency that I was at the time, and had spent probably up to a year really getting to know their business. And they were at the point that they were ready to sign with the agency. And it was at the same time that I decided that I was going to leave. I went and I explained to them that I was leaving, but they were going to be in great hands, and that I was going to introduce them to the team that was going to take their business, and that it could not be a better decision for them, but that I was moving on. And they said, "We're going with you." So I left, and my first client was Coca-Cola. So it was a godsend. It was a blessing. It was a sign, and I will be forever, indebted to a woman by the name of Janet Howard, who sadly passed away this year, but was the person at Coca-Cola who had faith and confidence in me and my ability, and said, "Let's do this."
Wow. Well, that's good, really good news to hear, and to land a client like Coca-Cola, right? So one last question for you. These last couple of years have been trying at best in business due to the pandemic. I know that because you have your own firm, you have, a lot of freedom, right? To be able to run it the way you want to run it. But you also take on a lot of responsibility, especially to your employees who I'm sure just adore you. But tell us about your experience during the pandemic. How did you ride that time? That had to have been a journey with, your clients, with your employees, and so forth. What was that like?
It was challenging. It was challenging for everybody. It was an unknown. We went from having, X amount of revenue coming in to zero. I mean, overnight, because in the face of the unknown, people do nothing. And in PR, when people do nothing, you don't get paid. So everything's put on hold. But what couldn't be put on hold was paying health insurance for my team, paying salaries for my team. Fortunately, we got lucky, and we had just let our lease expire because we were going to look for office space that looked different than what we were in at the time. We saw that the use of our office space was changing. So we got off better than a lot because we didn't have the overhead of the lease, because that December we had let the lease go, and we were looking for different office space when March 2020 hit. I also got very, very sick. I got COVID early in March. So March 20, I was sick as well. And at the same time, then thinking about how are we going to survive, and how long is this going to last, and what is this COVID thing? I was also very sick, and trying to look at what does the long-term future look like for WMG, and what does it look like for me? And I made some decisions. I made a decision that I would always, as long as I possibly could, pay health insurance for my employees, but at the same time, encourage them to use this time because we didn't have any work, use this time to think about what you really want to do, to think about what your life journey should be, because when are you ever going to have a chance to do this? And I'm thinking about that too, because right now it's a lot to think about, all these mortgages that need to be paid. And it's a lot of responsibility. And applying for PPP loans is not my destiny. I will keep doing it as long as I can, but that's not how I want to spend the rest of my life. So it was an opportunity for me to look at the next phase of my life, to look at the next phase of the business, and to encourage my team to look at how they were going to take this time that we were given and take lemons and make it to lemonade by really thinking about what they wanted out of life and out of their profession and career. And as we see, people have learned to work differently. And so a lot of people, they wanted to go and live different places, and they didn't want to necessarily work full time. And our industry, I think, is a lot stronger now, because we have people that we can pull in on projects that are available to work if they're the right person with the right experience and expertise for that particular project. And people have the ability to be mobile and not be tied to one company necessarily.
And Anne, I really think that your leadership models what a future leader looks like, or what current leaders should look like when it comes to caring about your workforce as humans, as far as, really thinking about, for instance, paying their health care for as long as possible. Thank you so much, Anne, for sharing so much. You've really come a long ways. It's been quite the journey, and you are quite an amazing leader. Thank you so much, Anne, for joining.
Thank you so much.
You bet. All right, we're going to move on to our next guest, who specializes in helping people to use their voice. Voices are important in PR, right? Voices are important to lift in communications and PR. Her latest book covers 75 extraordinary speeches made by women, telling nearly 4 centuries of our nation's history through the women who changed the nation with their voices. It's about voices. So please, I'd like to welcome Donna Rubin. Donna, hello.
Thank you. Thank you, Joanne. I'm so glad to be here. Really, this is really so meaningful to me. I focus on recovering voices of women, and I've come to appreciate in the last few years I've been working on this project in a much more profound way how important it is that we understand our history, that we understand that the world didn't just appear the way it is, that we all build on the people who came before us. My focus is on recovering women's history, so that's why I'm particularly grateful for this event and to Shelley and the museum for putting this spotlight on the women in PR. It really is tremendously important that we have an accessible history. And by accessible, I mean an event like this, the records that we have at the archives, so that we can look back and appreciate who made the world that we live in, but also in another sense, for me, it's an appreciation that we can change the world, right? It wasn't this way 10 years ago. It wasn't this way 100 years ago, and it's not going to be the same 100 years from now if each of us works to make it that way. So I really am so deeply, profoundly appreciative of the work that you're doing. I'm going to talk very briefly about 2 women who were pioneers in PR and who really changed the world for us and made it possible for us to be doing the work that we do. And the first one is Inez Kaiser. She was a trailblazer, but she didn't start in PR. She was actually a home ec teacher. We used to call it home ec. Do people call it that anymore? I'm not sure, but she taught for 20 years home ec in Kansas City. And then she opened her own PR firm. She called it Inez Kaiser and Associates. And she built up this firm. And one of her biggest clients right away was 7-Up. So she had a national accounts, and she was very successful. But Inez was also the first Black woman-owned PR firm. And Inez, she had, as I said, she had a national reputation. She used to write a column for the Kansas City Star called As I See It. And Inez did something very interesting. The reason I found out about her is because I collect women's speeches. And I discovered that in 1977, Inez used her voice and spoke up for social change. Patrice, you were talking about the importance of using our voices and creating social change through PR campaigns. Well, Inez went to Congress, to Washington, D.C., to give testimony. She was, I'm looking down because I want to make sure I get it right. She had founded the National Association of Minority Women in Business, and she went to speak to a congressional committee, and it was really a blistering attack. I mean, there's no other way to put it. It was just a real condemnation of prejudice, as she saw it, against minority-owned businesses. But the thing about Inez and her testimony is that she was very cool and meticulous. She used fact-based, evidence-based argumentation to bolster her case, and she laced her testimony with optimism that things could change if we put a spotlight on the wrongs that she perceived and that she experienced. And I'm going to read you just a very short excerpt from what she said to those congressmen in 1977, speaking about how difficult it was, how challenging it was for minority-owned business people, and particularly for women of color, to get a leg up. And here's what she said, I'm quoting Inez. "Another problem that we as minority, and especially Black women, are faced with is that our credibility is continuously questioned, is and has been continuously questioned. The program people and contracting officers of federal agencies still do not believe that Black women are capable of performing a task or rendering a service equal to other women and males. Black women can manage and run successful businesses if given an equal opportunity to compete in a free enterprise system." So I really admire her for standing up, telling it like it was, speaking from her own experience, giving mountains of evidence and data about how difficult it was to get a loan, how difficult it was to get paid quickly, how opportunities were flying by past her and going to other people when she knew she was just as qualified. It's Inez and people like her who really called out our wrongs and held our nation to its highest ideals and improved the way that we function. The next person that I want to highlight is somebody who I'm sure a lot of you have heard of, Marilyn Laurie. Marilyn Laurie was also a real trailblazer. She came a little bit after Inez, but I learned about Marilyn Laurie from a wonderful book written by Dick Martin, and he wrote a book called Marilyn, A Woman in Charge. That was published by the Museum of PR Press. So again, thank you to the Museum of PR for not just all the work that you do in building this wonderful collection and holding events like this, but also running a press and making sure that books are published that tell stories that have been of women who are underrepresented or that we don't know enough about, and making sure that we do know about them. So Marilyn spent almost 3 decades at AT&T. And can you imagine 3 decades from the 1970s to the 1990s, how much change she saw there? She was the member of the Management Executive Committee and head of public relations there. And she, when she joined it, I mean, AT&T was like everybody's phone company, right? It was even called the telephone company. And during the time that she was there, of course, she was there through the turbulence of the antitrust suit that broke up AT&T in the mid 1980s. And that was cataclysmic, really. Can you imagine having to manage the PR for that company during that time? And she remained there until the mid 80s and the mid 90s. And in Dick's book about Marilyn, he tells a really interesting story. Now, when Marilyn was in this position, she was basically the only woman at that level in that corporate arena. And she never really complained about gender discrimination, but she did speak about gender stereotyping. And he tells a story about how one time Marilyn was sitting with her boss at the AT&T headquarters, and she was wearing a blouse that had a tie. You know, it had like a little opening and then just a tie, and the two ends of the tie were hanging down. And while she was in a conversation with her boss, talking about work, he sprang up. She was at her desk. He was sitting opposite her. He sprang up, came over to her, leaned over her, and pulled the two ends of her tie together and tied a bow for her. Can you imagine? I mean, it wasn't a sexual gesture, but he was correcting her attire in a business meeting. I mean, it really is quite astonishing that he would do that. So she certainly did experience a lot of the highs and the lows of her time. And she really did her job well because she understood the DNA of the company and was able to be a voice for the company when they went through so many turbulent times. And I really commend you all Dick's book on Marilyn, because it's a fabulous read. And really, that's all I want to say. But I just want to conclude with the appreciation that if all of us have incumbent upon us to use our voices and put our voices into the world for the world that we want to see as PR professionals, as women, and also as human beings on the planet. We have so many problems that we face right now. Of course, Patrice was talking about some of that. And we had so many things that we can contribute to, but if we don't speak up, then we're not helping to make it a better world. So thank you all for all that you're doing. And I'm going to be quiet and listen to the rest of the program. Thank you.
Oh, Donna, such, good reminders that you brought to us today. I love the story about, gender stereotyping. Wow. I hope that doesn't ever happen again. That's all I can say, right? Thank you so much, Donna. Our next guest I'd like to introduce to you is from one of the most historic PR companies. She's made a very impressive career herself, but she joins us today to talk about Ketchum's B marks. A pioneer of the modern day practice of food marketing and nutrition communications. Really interesting work. Welcome, Jaime Schwartz Cohen. Jaime.
Thank you. Thank you, Joanne. This has been such an amazing event so far, and I'm so honored to be with you tonight to talk about the life and legacy of B marks. I actually never met B, but I've been fascinated by her since I first joined Ketchum 17 years ago, exactly, March of 2006. B is known among circles of PR professionals as well as nutrition educators as being the pioneer of modern day nutrition communications. And I started keeping an email folder of things I learned about B. And then this was actually when I first started. I've had this folder for years. But after joining this event as a listener last year, I was so inspired by all the stories of PR women who changed history. I wanted to learn more and do more to tell B's story. So I started connecting with B's former Ketchum and industry colleagues and also her family to learn more about her. And it's been kind of a passion project for me. Like Dana said, understanding our history and those who have come before us. I'm a registered dietitian, and like B, I also straddle the nutrition community and the PR world. But B didn't have any formal training in nutrition when she joined Boxford in 1965 in Portland, Oregon, which was acquired by Ketchum in 1969. But what she had was an intuitive sense that using nutrition as a marketing tool and elevating the voices of nutrition experts could build a brand's reputation. Her groundbreaking work began with the U.S. Potato Board in Ketchum's San Francisco office. She devised a first-of-its-kind strategy to shift perceptions of potatoes by highlighting its nutrition content. So today, a nutrition message and a food marketing campaign is common, but in the mid-1960s, the recipe release was the standard PR tool, as food editors didn't want it to appear as if they were preaching nutrition to their readers. B's strategy for the potato board changed the perception of potatoes from a fattening, starchy food to a nutritious vegetable. And the strategy was considered so effective that it became a case study in the Harvard Business School in the late 1970s. Some of the common tactics in nutrition communications today were actually pioneered by B. For example, rather than just pitching recipe releases to food editors, B's strategy involved bringing journalists and scientists together hosting seminars so magazine editors could learn about potato nutrition from recognized experts. And this also allowed the editors to see the value in having relationships with these trusted sources. As I was piecing together a timeline of her work, I came across a July 2001 PR Week article about the PR Golden Oldies, where B, then 79 years old, was quoted alongside Al Golan, Harold Burson, Betsy Plank, and others. And she mentioned that it was a placement in Vogue about potato nutrition that first earned her trust with the clients. And then I went into the Vogue archives and found that article that started it all from August 1st, 1972. And though that was 7 years before I was born, I felt like I uncovered an artifact of my own professional lineage. Teaching nutrition educators to use media to communicate their message was really a novel idea in the 70s. B's strategy involved the Potato Board sponsoring communication workshops and media trainings for members of the Society of Nutrition Education, the American Dietetic Association, as well as the Institute of Food Technologists, to arm the nutrition expert on how to use media to disseminate nutrition information and the importance of being an expert resource for journalists. These communication workshops were hosted for years, each sponsored by a different Ketchum commodity board. In the late 1970s, B testified in a hearing before Congress about best practices for nutrition education media campaigns as part of a response that she led for the Potato Board to the FTC regulations on food advertising. In the 80s, the PR campaign evolved to employ tactics common for food CPG, but that they had never been done before for a food commodity board, like sponsoring athletes. The U.S. Potato Board actually sponsored Olympic athletes, where potatoes were positioned as a fitness fuel, and the campaign went on a 20-city mall tour, very 80s. In the 80s, she then moved from San Francisco to New York to open Ketchum's new global headquarters office. And she actually shared an apartment with Dave Drobis and Paul Alvarez, two Ketchum executives and industry leaders. And that was also around the time she conceptualized the first opinion leader program of its kind, which aimed to fundamentally and strategically change the way people think about vitamins. This was known as the Vitamin Nutrition Information Service, or VNIS, on behalf of Roche. And one of these colleagues actually shared a story with me that a Roche marketing manager chased B through an airport to meet her and pitched her to work on his business because of her reputation. In the 90s, though the amount of folic acid this B2B company sold was extremely small, with the strength of the science, she saw an opportunity, and she persuaded this airport runner client to let Ketchum conduct a seminal program about folic acid and neural tube defects. The opinion leader strategy for VNIS was implemented for more than 20 years, and I actually worked on this program for a few years when I joined Ketchum. There are so many anecdotes her colleagues and friends shared with me that I don't have time to share tonight, including stories of her relationships with culinary luminaries like James Beard and Alice Waters, the opening of Ketchum's Food Center in 1978, which was an industry first for a PR agency, and stories from the Beehive, which her office was known as. But the one thing that all of the conversations I've had in the past year have had a common thread. They all started with, "I loved Bee." And under the backdrop of all of this, some also shared that not only did she break the glass ceiling professionally, but she broke societal norms as well, as a single mother with 5 children who left an abusive husband, moving from Albuquerque to Portland under the guise of visiting her sister. So as to establish this among the timeline of the events I shared, this was in 1961, just 4 years before starting her journey with Ketchum, and 30 years before the campaign that Patrice discussed. So it all really comes full circle with everything that we've heard tonight. Bee retired from Ketchum after nearly 40 years in the early 2000s and passed away at 95 in September 2017 after a decade with dementia. If you search her name, you won't find much. Maybe a reference to the Society of Nutrition Education and Behavior annual B. Marks Nutrition Communication Symposium, which is being hosted for the 30th year this summer, and also a blog post I wrote last May to honor her 100th birthday. Bee laid the groundwork for everything I do today as a dietitian working in PR. And in her work, I believe there are so many lessons from the past that we can learn for now and innovate for in the future. She was so ahead of her time when she developed relationships with health professionals, scientists, and regulatory bodies, recognized that farmers have stories to tell and should be heard, and recommended that fresh food commodities should use the same marketing practices as branded food. And I hope by sharing her story tonight, another generation of communicators, both in the PR and nutrition worlds, is inspired to innovate. And I'm also proud to say that this week, Ketchum announced the B-Marks Nutrition Communications Internship, a paid opportunity for an emerging nutrition communications professional to work with my team of 6 dietitians this summer. So helping to ensure B's legacy will live on.
Wow, that's pretty amazing. I'm watching, I'm sorry, there was a moment there because I'm watching the chat box and the remarks are just so interesting. The beehive, I love that. Jamie.
Yeah, it's been just so amazing. I mean, I try to schedule a call a week with people in her life because it just keeps me motivated too. And just hearing her work and her journey is just so incredible.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Jamie.
Thank you for having me.
Really appreciate you and enlightening us, right? Enlightening us. Thanks so much, Jamie.
Thank you.
Our next guest, wow, that's a good one. Our next guest, though, is just an amazing leader. She has a PhD in communications and PR and has been teaching communications for over 15 years. She's here today to talk about the first woman in the PR history, Zelda Popkin. So she's going to welcome Dr. Rachel Kovacs. We are excited in awe to hear about Zelda Popkin. Please take it away.
So I want to start out by talking about some general ways in which she was so different. She was a very unconventional woman, and she was also a woman of some contradictions, but in her life, she played many roles. She wasn't just a PR person. Obviously, that's something that is of major concern to this group here, and the fact that she was such an early PR person, but she was a trendsetter in the way that she established a full partnership in PR with her husband. So she was able to find that balance with the working and the childcare. They were full partners together, which was exceptional for her time. She also was a successful writer, and maybe her greatest ambition was to be a successful, serious writer, but she did work in not-for-profit and for-profit PR. She was an activist for social causes. She and her husband worked on anti-fascist campaigns in the 20s and the 30s. I'll go into that a little bit. They worked on political campaigns. She was active in social change for women. She worked together with a magistrate who happened to be the niece of Belle Moskowitz, whom I talked about a couple of years ago. And she also, after her husband passed, started a whole new life for herself as a writer, but also an advocate for social justice, going internationally to Europe after World War II and writing about the conditions in the DP camps, advocating for people who didn't have basic needs. And she actually went and reported about the fledgling state of Israel, came back and became she continued to write, and she was successful enough that she had some of her work put into TV and also a movie based on her work. But let's start out from where she was. It's a very unlikely success story. She grew up in an immigrant Jewish family, born in Brooklyn, but went to Wilkes-Barre, which was a mining country. And she was very, very different in terms culturally, but she had an enormous empathy for the struggle of the miners, with majorly Irish miners at that time. And she decided that she was not going to grow up in the tradition of her culture, which was basically get married, have kids, etc. She was going to be a different kind of woman. And she decided that she wanted to work on a newspaper. So when she finished school at 16, she became the first woman to work on the Times Leader, Wilkes-Barre paper, and was given terrible jobs, experienced terrible sexism, was paid terrible wages, and yet they wound up respecting her because she would do anything to get the information that was needed. She wrote, she learned how to write, and then 2 years later, she decided she would follow some of the people who left the paper and go to New York City and try to make her mark there. She tried to get into Columbia Journalism School. The head of the journalism school basically told her, go home and get married. Can you imagine the head of a school telling somebody to do that now? So she wasn't disillusioned. Instead, she spent 2 years at Barnard. learning formally about writing, etc. And she went out on her own. In 1918, through a connection, she got a job at the Joint, which is one of the Jewish agencies, and she was working for a man named Louis Popkin, who married her a year later, and they wound up leaving the Joint, even though they had done work for the Jewish Welfare Board and continued to do work for some of the Jewish not-for-profits. They wound up starting the Planned Publicity Service and had a bunch of different clients, very humorous ones. Zelda, interestingly enough, had a very ambivalent view of public relations. On some level, you could say she thought that what was going on at the time, or what they were forced to do to make money, was puffery. On the other hand, she understood that public relations could be a force for social change. As I said, she's a woman of many contradictions, but a strong, forthright woman. Before feminism, a real feminist who didn't really empathize with the women of the 60s and 70s and the 80s and the feminist movement, because she felt, look, I did it on my own. I made it on my own. Why do you need the help? You could do it too. Very, very forthright. In any event, during World War I, as I said, she worked for the Jewish Welfare Board. And when they owned their own agency, she took on clients, some of whom were very interesting clients. She ghost wrote a book for somebody who was a hairdresser who said he invented the permanent. It was called The Story of Hair. Probably the most publicized of her campaigns at that time was the National Straw Hats manufacturer, in which she and her husband tried to persuade people that every man needed 3 straw hats. He couldn't survive without 3 straw hats. One of the most widely reported and shocking campaigns that they basically made up was for the Working Girls Vacation Society, which had a saving funds for shop girls. And when they couldn't get their press releases across, they hired the Popkins to help them. And they created this myth about the shifters. The shifters, remember, this is the age 20s, the age of the flappers. They had secret signs, and they were going around soliciting money. It was like almost like a Ponzi scheme. They were morally decrepit. They were girls that, they were dubbed in a way the female Ku Klux Klan. And that really, they got attention in the Times. There was a big article about in the Times and other periodicals, other newspapers, about this group, this dangerous, socially off group called the Shifters. In between, she did different kinds of writing, but some of the more notable public relations moves that she made was she got Eleanor Roosevelt when Franklin Delano Roosevelt was trying to win the presidency. She was working for Arnold Constable, and Arnold Constable decided that they needed more publicity, more customers. So she wrote a letter to Eleanor Roosevelt and suggested, if your husband wins the presidency, would you go to Arnold Constable and buy a dress? Which Eleanor Roosevelt did, buy the dress for the inauguration. And then she wound up buying a lot of her clothes, after that at Arnold Constable. She was a steady customer. She once accompanied Lindbergh's wife on a mission. She also was a person who was, she and her husband were working for the Spanish, the American Friends of the Republics, right? They're against anti-Franco, and they wrote many during the Spanish Civil War, many press releases, and they tried to get the U.S. Army, the U.S. military, not to boycott or not to withhold equipment from the Spanish Republicans. Very important, in the 1930s, Father Coughlin, who was a vicious anti-immigrant, anti-Semitic, xenophobic person, and he was very powerful. They lobbied, and actually had a Reverend Burkhead who worked with them. They lobbied, and he had people who infiltrated the group, got them information, and eventually they were able to get Father Coughlin off the air because he was just a front in many ways for the Nazis. They got the FCC involved, etc. So working for the Lincoln Brigade, working for the anti-fascist forces, and then they worked on a political campaign for Democratic candidate in Connecticut, Robert Hurley. He ran in 1940, he ran again in 1942, was unsuccessful. In all of this, she really was in between doing some of her writing, but Lewis died suddenly of a heart attack in 1943. She had two sons, they were already out of the house, but regardless, it was an adjustment for her to go back, but she figured at this time she would try to make it as a writer, but she just didn't. She was very, very successful in a woman's mystery series called Mary Carver, and it was sold internationally, translated into other languages. She wrote popular fiction at that time. Some of it was lighter than other, but in between, she also worked on some serious journalism, which was in effect advocacy. So one of the things she did, I mentioned that she teamed up with Anna Cross, who was Belle Moskowitz's daughter, to write articles for the time. And with a group of women, they worked for social services in courts. In other words, the court system, when they had juvenile delinquents, what we call them today, who were at-risk students who were doing at-risk children who were doing criminal, and I say they're juveniles, right? Who were doing criminal activities, petty criminals, etc., that there should be social services. It's not just a question of putting these kids in behind bars. They need social services and support systems so that they won't have to turn to crime. And she did this again in another article in the New York Times, which was for a women's court, women's social service, okay, sociological courts, she called them, where women, particularly prostitutes, who were like persona non grata in society, would be able to get help to pull out of the situation, which was very, revolutionary at the time. After he died again, she turned back in some sense to causes. She worked for Hadassah in Canada from 1953 to 1954. But prior to that, what got her back to some extent with the organizations, with the not-for-profits, was after World War II, the Red Cross sent her to Europe to report on some of the activities, what was going on, the conditions in the DP camp. And she wrote an article which was in the Reader's Digest about the conditions in the camp, but also on her own and not for the Red Cross. She went to Vienna and she advocated when she saw some of the ways in which the DPs were being treated, and also that they lacked basic supplies that were being given out to the civilian population, like milk. She really went to the top and went to bat for these people, particularly the children, to get the milk. She also wound up working as a novelist and some of these novelists were novels were very well received, Quiet Victory and other ones about the conditions in the camps, and also the condition, she was one of the first people to write about the Holocaust after World War II, and also went to Israel and wrote about the conditions during the War of Independence. And as I said, when she came back in the 50s, she was very lucky. She was not indicted. She didn't have to testify in front of the McCarthy House on Un-American Activities Committee, even though during the Spanish Civil War, they had been supporting the Republican forces, many of whom were communists. So she escaped that scathing type of public reproval. So the other thing is that she also didn't allow herself be pigeonholed. So her passion about writing, she did go back to writing. She briefly worked, as I said, for certain Jewish organizations, but she wasn't so crazy about that. And she didn't retire till later in life. She passed in 1984. So she was really an exceptional woman. She was forthright, she was strong, she was tough, but at the same time, she was very empathetic. And she had an inner mechanism that didn't really like the puffery part of PR. She was very sincere. She wasn't into the hype at all. And she always encouraged people to free the men and women, to free themselves up, to experience things, to take advantage of new opportunities, to explore new horizons like she did. She was an exceptional woman. And I just want to share with you This is the book that just came out a couple of weeks ago. Jeremy Popkins, that's her grandson. He's a professor and chair of history at the University of Kentucky. Zelda Popkin. And this is her autobiography, Open Every Door, which is very interesting. It's one perspective. It's her perspective. I think Professor Popkin's book is a little more objective, but these were big assets for my research. And also I found a number of articles that were written by her or about her. So I'm glad to introduce her to you.
Dr. Rachel, thank you so much. That she's an amazing woman, right?
Right. Very unique.
Amazing.
Very unique.
Thank you so much, Dr. Rachel. At this point, we are going to move into the latter section of the show. But before that, I have a note. We had hoped to share a video of my conversation with Stephanie Mehta, CEO of Mansueto Ventures. But instead, we're going to send that out at a later date. So just so you know to expect that. And hopefully you'll take a look at it. It's quite an amazing video. So she's a brilliant woman as well. So we're going to move into the Q&A section of the program. And the first question is for Carol. Carol Evans, do you mind coming on camera real quick if you are able to? Carol.
Sure. Hey.
So the question for you is, did other magazines follow suit in writing about working mothers?
Yes, many did. I mean, they really had to because, first of all, the percentage of working mothers grew and grew and grew, you know, until it was about 72% of mothers were working. So they couldn't ignore that demographic. But it was an article here or there because nobody wanted to offend the stay-at-home moms. And so they had to be careful, whereas we could go full out and just advocate for working mothers and help them because that's what our identity was. So it was, you know, a little bit for them and a whole lot for us.
Wow, that's pretty amazing. In fact, I'm just going to take some, because I have the mic, I'm going to ask all of our guests to turn on their cameras so everybody can answer, right? And I don't know, the production people may get mad at me for this, but I'm going to ask it anyway, just because I'm the MC. So Patrice, the next question is for you. It would be great to hear about the role of data and or stories in achieving the shifts in awareness of domestic violence that you've achieved. So they'd like to hear more.
Thank you. Well, actually, I didn't even get, because I had a limited period of time, I didn't really get into what we actually did as part of the Love is Not Abuse campaign, because I was trying to show you the entire, you know, the activating this, this social issue, the social movement, and all the things that went into actually, you know, creating that systemic change that we were striving for. But data every year, and we worked on the campaign for 14 or 15 years. Every year we had research as a component of what we did. So we were always trying, and the reason we conducted research was it was something that the media could easily report on versus trying to do their own stories of victims of domestic violence and perpetrators and, you know, what happened to them. I mean, those stories took too long to actually produce. So we knew it would be easier for them just to report on the latest research that we conducted. And so every year we conducted research of a different segment of the population. So one year it would be consumers at large and focusing on what women said about domestic violence versus what men said. Another year we'd focus on the business sector. So it would be a survey of corporate executives and trying to understand if they felt they had responsibility in any ways, because we wanted to, of course, talk about what businesses could do to support employees who were victims of domestic abuse, because a lot of times going to work was their safe haven, right? So
Ah.
employers had to, there were things that employers could actually do to support employees. One year we surveyed academia because we wanted to understand where, what people in academia were thinking about domestic violence. Was it a problem or wasn't it? One year we surveyed teenagers. So, every year there was a different sector that we were surveying. And I would say research is so important for every campaign, especially a social issues campaign, where you're trying to convince people, that there's a problem and that action needs to be taken, and, what the experts say could be done, should be done, that kind of thing.
Wow. This just tells you how important this work is and how much research is needed as well, and to be shared, right, Patrice? This next question is for any of our guests. And I really love this question. Do you have advice for a single mom finishing school in her 30s and joining the PR field? How can we find opportunities to excel at work and provide for our families without the flexibility of being young and childless? So there's two questions there, actually. So let's take the first one. Do you have advice for a single mom finishing school in her 30s and joining the PR field?
Well, first of all, I'd like to say that, single moms, they are really amazing women. And so many of our readers were single moms, as you can imagine. I mean, we had the two income couples, we had a few stay-at-home dads, and we had a lot of single moms reading the magazine. I think single moms, there's something funny that they used to say to us, was that they didn't have to take care of that third child, the husband. And that it was easier to be single than married. But, I just think they take a lot of responsibilities on their shoulders, and we should all be very proud of them.
And we have a lot of men who are allies, right?
Yes, many, many, many.
Joanne, I'd like to take that. I'm actually a single mom and have been since my daughter was 18 months. So I got married, had my daughter, and got divorced during the time that I was in the White House. And she was 18, she was almost 2 when I left the White House. And I left the White House when I realized that she was afraid of grass. She had spent so much time. I would go home and get her at 5 o'clock when the babysitter had to leave, and bring her back to work with me. And she's fine now. She got over the grass issue, but would say that you have to incorporate your family into your life, and it's hard. But it's particularly hard if you're a single mom to try to separate the two. And so she came to work with me. She came to work with me in the office when I started my agency. She would draw pictures of the team, and instead of nameplates, we had pictures of, with crayons on the door. And I would encourage other people to bring their kids to work. And in the PR business, it's not 9 to 5. So oftentimes we're there in the evening, and oftentimes we're there on the weekends, and we're working on projects. And if you incorporate your child or your children into your life, not only do they get to spend time with you, but they also get to see what it's like to be a working mom. And hopefully that will inspire them and show them that they too can do both.
I'd like to comment on it also, if it's possible.
Yeah.
Just briefly. When I went back to school, I had a background in theater. I was a single mom of a large family, and I had trepidation about it. But when I showed that I was determined, my employers, I was a graduate student, but also I was assistant editor of a major communication journal. So I was basically almost living there. They were my, God bless my dissertation committee, God bless the people that I worked with, because they were incredible. And, if I had a sick child, I could bring her to the office. So, and I did internships then, I had to do, and it was just, maybe I'm a lucky exception, but I don't think anymore. I think that in our world, a single mother is not an anomaly anymore, and people understand all the baggage that goes with it. Not in a negative baggage, but I love my kids, but I'm saying it was a handful. And I found a positive role models, and I found positive support. So I was very lucky. And I think if I did it with a large family, people can do it too. And I encourage women to go out there and do it.
Absolutely. Yeah. And shining examples are right here. Absolutely. I know I was a single mom at one time too, and I thought I was never going to make it because all we had sometimes was top ramen on the table, but you do what you have to do, right? Okay, so final question. I think we have time for one more question. I hope. This is from somebody anonymous. I knew I wanted to be in PR and couldn't explain why. After listening to Patrice, I understand it's the ability to activate social change. Wow, inspiring. This person will have their BA in applied psychology and media relations coming in June. What advice do one of you have to offer for a single mom trying to get into PR? Would I need to get into a PR program? Is this a realistic goal with time constraints? So I think we might have sort of answered a little bit of this. Anyone else want to offer some advice here?
I would say also just build a network, a community of other single moms in the industry to learn from them, to bounce things off them in real time. Building that network is invaluable, and just always having people that are going through similar things that you could talk to and learn from. Having that support is so important.
Well said, Jamie. Thank you. All right. Well, I have to thank you all so much. Carol, Rachel, Jamie, and Patrice, Donna, you have been just amazing guests. And thank you for sharing your heart, your stories, experiences of others. So much information there. I can't tell you how much we all appreciate what you have brought into our lives, led us up to where we are now, and inspire us to move forward. So at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Matilda, who is going to wrap it up for us. Matilda, thank you.
Thank you so much, Joanne, and thank you to everyone who joined us tonight to celebrate Women's History Month. Tonight's event was underwritten by Amazon and sponsored in part by Google, Grady College at the University of Georgia, the Diversity Action Alliance, and Compro. We hope you all had a fantastic evening with us, learning from all these remarkable women and their stories. And we want to take this moment to give a special thanks to Joanne for taking us through this evening. One step at a time, we're all writing history. Don't forget to follow us on social medias. Our next event will be on March 23rd, when we will talk about the tech hub in Eastern Europe and the opportunities in the region. Thank you all so much, and we're looking forward to see you all very, very soon again. Have a great evening, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Have a great evening.
Good night.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Joanne. Thank